This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
That sucks. Allergies in West Tennessee suck. I hate them. Like, it just seems like as soon as the pollen comes out and there's like plumes of green, growing out of everything, and it seems like they're blowing, and I wind up with more than my body can possibly handle somehow embedded in my sinus cavity, and it's just terrible. That's bad. You've heard good jokes, you've heard bad jokes, you've heard jokes that suck, right? Like, why do ducks have feathers? So that it could cover their butt quack. That joke does not suck. That's a funny joke, okay? So there's those jokes. Thank you, Scott. I thought that's your favorite joke back there. So, it's good. I'm glad that for you. All right, so, man, there's all kinds of stuff in life that's disappointing. Last week we talked about how cancer sucks, and the bottom line that I got to, for me anyways, is that God thinks cancer sucks too. And there's no piece of that where you're not sharing that with us, man. And if you didn't see last week, go back and watch it online. It's valuable, helpful to you if you're walking through that journey, to others that you know and care about that are walking through that journey of dealing with a disease that just seems to be ever present in our lives. Today we're talking about some of this, also kind of one of those other things that suck in life. And the truth is that it affects a massive amount of people. 50 million Americans deal with depression every year. 50 million Americans. I mean, that's a massive number of people. Around 25% of the population of the United States, around 25% of the population of the world deals with depression. This like piece of our emotional journey that just seems to be overwhelming to us, and it spirals out of control, and it gets to a place in our lives where it literally cripples us. And there's none of us, not one single person, I don't care how positive you are, or how much you exercise, or how much you go through and mind your diet, there's not one of us who's immune to it. Our brain chemistry is just something that just kind of can go off. Now, there are some things we can do to lend to it. There's some things we can do that keep us from help, being so prone to it. But the reality is every one of us has this potential in our life where we'll struggle with it. Every person in this room either deals with depression or knows someone who deals with depression that's close to them in their life. And it's a struggle. And so I want to just, before we even get rolling, I want to tell you a few things that are going to be important as we're going to talk about this today. The first thing is, let me just tell you that depression is a big deal. It's a huge deal. It's not something we can just kind of slough off and go, oh, no worries, don't worry about it, just shake it off. And the person that you know that's struggling through it will love the fact that I say from up here, telling them just to feel better or cheer up isn't going to help. It's a big deal, and it's not something that you can just go kind of, oh, well, I'll just shake it off. It's not a bad day. It's not a bad week. Depression is an issue that's a big deal in our lives, and it's not always just a simple choice. There's a lot of process and a lot of brain chemistry that goes into it. Stuff that honestly I'm not even qualified really to lend to, except for us to understand that people we know and love go through it every single day, myself included. And it's been a journey of our lives. It's family history for me. It's part of our family story. Depression's a part of it. And then we come to that somewhat genetically, and then you deal with that, and you pile on, exercise, or you pile on some of the other things that we may or may not do that lend to it. And man, it just gets to be a problem. But depression is a big deal. You can't just kind of slough this off like it's no big deal. If it's somebody that you know that has it or that's dealing with it, you can't just tell them to feel better, right? And if you're going through it, I want you to know something. You don't have to go through this alone. It's a big deal. You don't have to go through this alone. And you're not just going to kind of weather through it. It's not going to go away. We have to deal with it. We have to begin to work on it. The second thing I want you to know is that you're not weak for going through this. This is not a weakness on your part. You're not a bad person. You're not like less than somebody else. If you're going through, or you know somebody who's going through, struggling through depression, you're not a weak person for dealing with this. It comes with the territory of the places we are in life. That is part of it. You're not a weak person. The third thing I want you to know before we even get really rolling today is that we're not going to fix you today. Because this is not the kind of church that does that, right? This isn't a group of people who used to be people like you. We're not a group of people who tolerate people like you. And we're not a group of people who try to change or fix people like you. We're just people like you trying to take our next step and help people do that, help people take their next step toward Jesus. And so we're not going to fix anything in 30 minutes, right? I mean, if I could fix it with one talk in 30 minutes, then you didn't have that bad of a problem walking in here, right? It was not that big of a deal. If I could fix it in 30 minutes, you didn't really need any help you could have done this yourself in an hour, right? So it's no big deal that we're really talking about it, except for the fact that it brings it to the surface and helps us deal with it. And the thing I want us to understand is that this isn't just you and me, and it's not just our time, because this stuff has been around for years, for generations, for literally thousands of years. In Matthew chapter 17, there's the story of Jesus, and he takes his closest few disciples, Peter, James, and John, and he takes them up to what we call the Mount of Transfiguration. Now, it didn't get called that until this one event, because he takes them up to the top of this mount, and he literally transfigures. And in front of them, he shows Peter, James, and John his deity. He shows them the full glory of God. It's pretty crazy what happens. And in this one moment, Jesus is next to Moses and Elijah. And in this story, Matthew chapter 17, you see Moses and Elijah and Jesus in this story, and then you've maybe heard it before. The guys are like, hey, let's just hang out here. This is pretty awesome. I'll build like forts for everybody. We can like have a club. It'll be cool. But here's the thing that I want you to notice, is this isn't just you and me. It's not just our day and time. It's not just our story. This stuff has been around forever. You see evidence of depression in both Moses' life, Moses's life, and in Elijah's life. You see evidence of it in amazing ways. In Numbers chapter 11, Moses goes through this point where he gets to the bottom of it, and he just begs God, would you just kill me? I mean, he just gets to the bottom. Now you're thinking, Moses, he's Moses. I mean, he's like just led this huge thing out of Israel. He gets out of it. He goes through all this stuff. You're thinking, man, that guy is a winner, right? He's a faith winner. How can a person who has that kind of story get to the bottom of it and go, God, I just want you to kill me. I'm just despairing. I have no desire to live. But we're not really going to focus in on Moses' story. You can read that for yourself in Numbers chapter 11 if you want to do that. But I want to focus in on Elijah's story, the other character in that story, because his story is pretty profound. Now, you know Moses' story, because when he drops in on the scene, there's we see him as a baby, we see him in the basket, he floats down the river, he's in the palace, he grows up in this palace under Pharaoh, then he kills an Egyptian, he gets, evicted, kicked out, chased out, whatever. He gets all this stuff, winds up in the wilderness, he has his own family, God speaks to him in the bush. We see this whole big deal that plays out in Moses' life. But Elijah's not that way. Elijah drops in on the scene out of nowhere. Now, he's a big deal player. He's not a small prophet. He's a prophet of God, and he's in a big way, but he just drops in out of nowhere. Now, I'm not going to put most of this on the screen for you because it's just going to get confusing. I just want you to hear the story that's going on. I'm going to walk you through really what is 3 chapters of the book of 1 Kings, okay? Because I know that's a lot for us to understand, and I certainly don't want to spend a ton of time reading it to you. You can read it for yourself. It's a valuable story, okay? But it starts in not Romans. It didn't start in Romans at all. It starts in 1 Kings chapter 17. It says, now Elijah was from Tishbe in Gilead, and he told King Ahab, as surely as the Lord God of Israel lives here, the God I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word. Now, that's a big deal. That's the first mention of Elijah in all the Bible. He just shows up on the scene. Now, Elijah was from Tishbe of Gilead and told King Ahab. I mean, the first time we ever see him, he's in front of the king, telling the king, listen, God sent me here. I'm here in front of you, and here's the deal. There's not going to be any dew or rain in this deal, in this whole area until I give the word. And that's a big deal, right? This is the first time we really get a story of him. Now, over the next 2 chapters are some pretty eventful chapters. If you like fighting, if you like conflict, if you like to read about victory and just some crazy stuff that happens in the Bible, man, 1 Kings 17, 18, and 19 are some great stories. There's some stories that you might already be familiar with anyways, because they're pretty common stories. So just to kind of give you a little run through, I mean, he announces this big drought. He says, hey, listen, this isn't going to happen. Nothing's going to happen here in this area. For the rest of chapter 17, this widow, he kind of goes up to her and he says, hey, I don't have any food. I don't have anything to eat. Can you put me up and take care of me? God will bless you for it. And she's like, man, I am so poor that literally I have a little bit of flour, a little bit of oil, I have a little bit left to make just some bread, and then we're going to make this, and my son and I are going to eat this, and that's all we have, and then we're going to die. I mean, that's a big deal. Like, it's literally her last meal. And he says to her, listen, if you'll just provide this to me, God will take care of you. And so she does it, and every day she goes back. Maybe you heard this story in 1 Kings. Every time she opens the jar, there's a little bit more oil, there's a little bit more flour, all the whatever ingredients you have to make bread. I don't know what goes in there. But anyways, you get the idea. She makes bread, and it's pretty powerful stuff, right? I mean, this is a miraculous showing of God's power and God's hand on Elijah's life. It's pretty cool. And then comes this day where the son gets sick, and she's starting to see this despair, and he gets sick, and worse and worse and worse. Elijah's still around. Eventually, the kid dies. The widow's like, what are you doing? I don't understand. My son's dead. And Elijah takes the son, goes up to the roof, and lays hands on him and prays, and God brings this kid back to life. I mean, it's a pretty cool story, right? I mean, 1 Kings chapter 17 unfolds a pretty big way. God's showing up in a big way. He tells them there's going to be a drought. There is a drought. He provides for this widow. He raises the dead. The story just keeps kind of unfolding. In chapter 18, he goes back to Ahab. Ahab is a bad dude, okay? Ahab is like, he's not a good king, okay? There are some good kings in Israel. There are some bad kings in Israel. Ahab is on the bad list. But nobody in Ahab's life is as bad as his wife, okay? Behind every bad man is a really bad woman, right? I'm just kidding. Jezebel is his wife. You've heard the word Jezebel, right? Even if you didn't know this story, you've been like, oh, like when somebody is really thinking really bad about somebody, they would be like, that she's a Jezebel, like, right? That be would have huge slam, right? That's way worse than skank, or never mind, I won't say more. But she's really, really bad news, okay? And so when he unfolds this stuff into going in to talk to Jezebel and Ahab, man, this is not good. He's bad. She's way, way worse. She's as bad as they get. And so Elijah feels called by God, right? And he goes into Jezebel and Ahab, and he tells them, look, I'm going to challenge your prophets. My God is going to challenge your God. Now, he's got kind of the leg up on it because he knows their God doesn't exist. So that's fairly easy on this one. So it's kind of like, I'm going to challenge your God. But really what he was saying is he knew all along your God doesn't really exist. So he's looking in Ahab and Jezebel's eyes and going, I'm challenging you because I know your God doesn't exist. And so he says, listen, I want you to bring all the prophets of Baal and all the prophets of, and I'm trying to keep looking at my notes because Asherah, okay? 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. And I want you to bring these 850 people together, and I want to challenge them. You've heard this story, right? He says, I want you guys to build this altar over here, and I want you to put a sacrifice in the altar, put all the wood on the altar, get it ready, and you guys call out to your gods and beg him to send down fire on this deal and light it up, right? This is the old school way of getting lit. Okay, so he caused, they're begging, they're like crazy, they're cutting themselves, they're going nuts, they're like this huge ritual, all this stuff, they're literally exhausted. And so Elijah's like, and I love Elijah's way of doing things because he has like a dramatic flair. He's like, hey, why don't you guys douse a little water on mine? You know what? Why don't you guys go get a whole bunch of barrels of water and let's just soak it. And you dig a trough around it and we'll fill this thing up so much until the trough around it is full. And then he's like, you guys think it's wet enough or you think we should get some more water? Let's get some more water. And they keep pouring it on here. And he's like, he's just rubbing it in at this point. I mean, it's just for dramatic sake, right? And then he calls down one prayer and boom, fire jumps out of the sky, lights the whole joint up. I mean, it's a huge, not a joint, lights the whole place up. It's a big deal. There's this very much oh, wow, that was really embarrassing. 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah all praying like crazy, going nuts, cutting themselves, making all this mess. And he soaks the thing down. There's no way it should light. And man, it's on in a big way. That's the end of chapter 18. So 17 and 18, big, powerful moments. And you've had these, right? Even if you're struggling through the whole idea of depression, you've had moments on top, haven't you? I mean, those moments where you're like, this was a great day. This was amazing. Like, I remember getting married. I remember this issue. I remember when we had our first child. Man, I was on top of the world. And then the chapter closed. And then this happened or that happened, and it seemed like at first I was discouraged a little, and then it seemed like a little bit further I went on, and that discouragement kind of from 1 or 2 days kind of turned into a bigger deal, and it just seemed like it. Did you remember how that works? That's how the process in our brain works a lot of times. We go from like, oh, I'm kind of bummed, I'm downcast, to I'm kind of discouraged, to I'm kind of depressed. And then we get to a place in our lives, and a lot of us get here, and there's no shame in admitting this, that we're in total despair. We're desperate for hope, desperate for relief from pain. And man, we see terrible things happen when that idea of being downcast and discouraged and depressed and despaired and desperate for hope and for healing and for some sort of clearance, right, of all this pain. And we see terrible things happen when we're desperate. And the same thing happens in Elijah's life. He has this literally, listen, I got to tell you, I've seen some pretty cool things happen, right? Sheila and I have been in ministry now for all of our married life, right? Since day one we've been in ministry. We've seen God do some unbelievable stuff. We've seen some of you go through some pretty amazing things and been on the other side of it and been able to see God working in lives. we planted a church, for crying out loud, but we've never seen anything like 17 and 18 of 1 Kings, right? We've never seen some people. I had a friend who said, listen, I had him come speak for a retreat, and he said to me, hey, listen, I'm going to go pray at this funeral. And if this guy comes back to life, I'm not going to make it to speak at the retreat. And I'm like, if he comes back to life, dude, you got this by me, right? It's okay. I'll speak at the retreat. You're good, right? I've never seen anything like that. It just doesn't happen for me. So this is a mountaintop experience. He's at the top of it. And then this is when, some pretty great things have happened, right? God's done some powerful stuff. There should be people lining up outside the doors going, hey, Elijah, tell me about this God who lights the wet stuff on fire when these guys couldn't even get him to show up at all. And just tell me about the God who makes fools out of these people. You would think that would be the case, right? Yeah, not so much. All of a sudden, there's this desperation in his voice, because here's what happened at the very, very beginning. This one's going to be on the screen. When Ahab got home, he told Jezebel of everything that Elijah had done, all the stories, right? All the Baal and the prophets and the cutting themselves in the water and how they looked foolish and all that kind of stuff, including the way he had killed the prophets of Baal. I didn't mention that part. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. This is powerful and crazy, right? May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you or killed you just as you killed them. Elijah was afraid and he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. He says, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors who've already died. Now here's what's going on. He's had this mountaintop killer experience, right? He's been on cloud nine. He's pumping it out. He's doing great things. You could just see this huge thing, but he can't run on this kind of adrenaline that's going that way, because there's something inside that takes him from cloud nine to the basement all at one time. And he gets to this place where he goes in and he hears this message and he runs, right? He doesn't run a little bit. It's not like Beersheba is not around the corner, right? He's not, I run and get a beer. He's running to Beersheba. He's in Dan, and this is the north end of the whole kingdom, and he runs all the way to the south end. This isn't just him panic and run over to the next town, right? Or panic and run 2 towns away. This isn't just that first downcast moment, where our eyes go from up to downcast, right? If he was downcast, he would have run over a town or two. If he was just a little bit kind of, despairing a tiny bit or just kind of discouraged, he'd maybe run a county or two. But he doesn't. He is in total desperation. He runs from Dan all the way in the top of the area, all the way almost to Egypt, as far south as he can get to Beersheba. And he runs there and he gets away from all of it, and he hides himself. And he says this in that passage. He runs and he finds shade under a broom tree. I don't know, you can Google a broom tree later. It doesn't provide much shade. He's in the desert, literally in the desert, hiding, kind of trying to find a tiny bit of relief from a stick in the ground, right? And he's kind of under the edge of this broom tree and feeling completely desperate. He calls out to God and just says, God, would you just kill me? Now listen, here's the key piece. I'm no better than my ancestors who've already died. He's saying literally, they're dead, and I'm not doing anything better than they are. Now listen, all of us are looking in from the outside, aren't we? And we're going, what are you talking about, dude? I mean, like, you're raising the dead, you're doing this, you're seeing all these amazing things happen. And from the outside of us looking at Elijah's life, we're like, dude, get your head out of your butt, man, because this is crazy good. What God's been doing through you is huge. You're so useful to God, but what's the problem? He can't see it, can he? He can't see the good things, right? Because he's alone, he's separated from everything, he's desperate, and that feeling that he seems to have no control over, right, has just overwhelmed him, and he's begging God to die because he's no more useful than all of his dead relatives to the kingdom. He's no more useful, and he doesn't see the value. Listen, I wish we had time to sort through all this stuff, but I just want us to kind of settle and understand a few things that are at risk in our lives, right? These are just times when you and I might struggle with these onset of depression. Now, if you're already going through this, man, I want to make it okay for one thing. I want you to understand something. If you're right now struggling through depression, I want you to understand it's okay to go see a doctor. It might even be vital or important for you to go see a doctor. It's not wrong for you to take medication. Christians are stupid sometimes. We have the dumbest opinions that don't even make sense because we'll take an Advil or a Tylenol, or we'll take something when we have a headache. But then when somebody goes to a doctor and wants to take an antidepressant, we're like, no, you just need to have more faith. Medical problems have medical solutions. And the medicine doesn't have any power that God didn't give it to begin with, right? That's an amen moment right there. Medicine doesn't have any power that God didn't give it. Advil works on our headaches because God gave it power, right? Anti-inflammatories work because God gives it power. That's the same thing's true when it comes to serotonin and epinephrine. When God has given it power, and medical solutions are needed for medical problems. If you've got that problem, if you're dealing with depression now, go see a doctor. It's okay. But understand something. You're looking at some places in your life, and I want you to just kind of learn for a minute from some of Elijah's story. You are susceptible to depression, at least looking at Elijah's story, after times of intense ministry output. When you're like pushing all the time. For our staff, I worry about it around Easter. Because it's like the Super Bowl of church, right? We're all on. And then we don't take good enough, right? And we pile a concert on the week after, right? Because we're not smart, okay? So we pile it on and we push hard and we're working with people and it's tough. I also worry about it for us during the winter months. Because while everyone else is going through that seasonal affective depression or that disorder where we deal with kind of the gray skies and the loom, we go through that same stuff too, and then we kind of help mop up a lot of stuff that's going on in our lives and in our lives together as a family when we help work through those things and worry about it through those things. So you'll see this, just like what happened in Elijah's life. We have a tendency to go through rough spots in our life after significant ministry output or pouring into somebody's family. You might have that same issue. You've got a brother or a sister or a cousin or a friend who's going through a really tough ministry, really tough marriage, or a really tough season in their life where they lost a loved one, and you're pouring into them and you're caring about them and you're loving them, you're putting your arm around them and you're talking to them, you're praying with them. After those seasons of that, watch for it. Because there's a good chance the enemy's going to bring in that level of attack after significant ministry output. Another thing that you see that is after relational conflict. I mean, what happens in Elijah's life, right after he has this bump in the, like conflict with Jezebel where she threatens him, what happens? Man, he runs. And there's this tendency to go, man, this relationship is kind of on the rocks, right? So if you've had some really big bouts and really struggled times in your marriage, and I want you to know something, it's okay to have struggles in your marriage. It's okay to hit bumps. It's okay to be discouraged. It's okay to have it not just look like it's all right and everything's all happy and good. You're not a bad Christian because you had a fight, right? It's okay. You're not a bad Christian if you have 100 fights. You're not a bad Christian if you fight every single day. It's okay to have conflict. We've got to work through those things. But the problem is, right after that's over, right after that's happening, right? That's when the enemy has a tendency to bring in and tell you, hey, this isn't working. You're a failure. You're miserable. And then we go from downcast to depressed, and we want to work through this progression of pain in our lives, and we ultimately wind up desperate, and he loves to swoop in. So understand that after relational conflict, your tendency to be depressed is going to go up. Same thing after physical exhaustion. Can you imagine what it was like for Elijah? I mean, all this stuff. I mean, he's healing the sick. He's literally, the hands of miracles. He's working in people's lives. And this doesn't even count all the things over that season that were going on that were huge for him. And then this whole build an altar. Those guys, the prophets of Baal weren't helping him build an altar. I mean, he's physically putting the stones on. He's physically cutting this animal. He's physically putting this sacrifice on the altar. He's helping pour out the water. He's doing all this physical labor. After significant physical output in our lives, there's a tendency for us to kind of sit down and go, it's over, and relax. And then when we relax, we have a tendency, right, to just kind of spin slowly out of control. To go from that place of exhaustion into downcast, into that spiral of losing control over it. So after significant ministry output, after relational conflict, after times of physical exhaustion in our lives, and after major victory. I mean, how many people, I don't know, show of hands, I'm not asking you to show it, but how often is postpartum depression a significant issue for new moms? It's huge. You just literally birthed a child, right? I mean, this is a huge deal. Everybody's excited. Everybody's oohing and ahhing and just amazed by this new life. And right? Even when you're going through it, I should be so happy. Why am I not happy? Because after a major victory like that, it's not uncommon at all to face some major bouts with depression. It's a significant issue after we've been on the mountaintop, just like Elijah, right? I mean, he'd been on the mountaintop. It's easy to feel like it's slid out of control and life is just despairing. I want you to understand something. We see this over and over again after great victories, but we also see it after great disappointments. When we go through something that really is difficult, just went through a nasty divorce, man, that's a prime ground for the enemy to bring in that push towards depression and for you to kind of just let it slip away. Those are times when we have a tendency to just kind of I don't know what to do, and so we just kind of throw up our hands. And that downcast goes to discouraged. That 1 or 2 days lasts 4 or 5 or 7 days or 12 days or 15 days. And that discouraged kind of slips into depression. The next thing we know, it's been months since we felt good. The next thing we know, it's been months and months, and we're desperate for any kind of hope, any kind of healing, any kind of relief. And the enemy loves to leverage each of those stages to steal and kill and destroy. So I'm going to end this in a little bit of a weird way. I'm going to tell you 3 easy steps to get depressed. I mean, it came right out of the story. If you're not depressed, let me just tell you 3 easy ways to do it, okay? Because this is the best way I can imagine it coming in. Because when we look at this story, we see Elijah lean into some really easy ways to get depressed. And where does it land him? Under a stick, trying to find shade in a desert, telling God, I want to die. So let's just look at his story. The first thing is, find a place by yourself. If you want to get depressed, find a place by yourself. Because that's the easy thing to do, isn't it? You're struggling through something, and you're like, man, I don't want people around me. And it's easy. You know what we're seeing more and more today than we've ever seen before? And this is probably, and I'm going to get a lot of head nods out of it, or if you're not going to nod your head, it's because you don't want to admit it yet. But we see instances of social anxiety at an all-time high. We're so connected on our phones, and we know everything that's going on in people's lives, but we are masters at pushing people away. You want to get depressed? Spend time by yourself. Hide behind Facebook. Feel connected to people through social media. You want to fight depression, right? Reverse that. Reverse that. Be around people even if it's difficult. It's what is needed. God designed us this way. It's not easy. It's not simple. It's not like, oh, that'll make it all better all in one time. But choose intentionally. I'm not saying go run into a crowd and make friends with strangers, right? I mean, when we're struggling through this stuff, have a couple of people over. Choose this week to say, I'm gonna do the uncomfortable thing and spend time with this friend because it's important to do, important to be around people. You want to get depressed? Just find a place by yourself. The second thing is, if you want to get depressed, focus on the negative. Focus on the negative. Now, I know what's going on, right? Your spouse, if you're going through depression, your spouse is going, why are you always so negative? Why are you always doing this? That's not what I'm talking about. And please, depression is not a platform for you to nag your spouse, okay? This is an important thing. You need to help and support and love them toward a healing place in their life. But understand something. If you want to get depressed, if you want to get further into it, by all means, focus on the negative. Focus on how things aren't going well. Focus on the queen that wants to kill you instead of the 850 prophets that you defeated yesterday. Focus on how that thing that seems to be a bad problem rather than in all the good. But if you don't want to get depressed, I'm not saying choose not to be negative. I'm saying choose to focus on the positive things. Choose to say, I'm going to find joy. When I walk through people through this, I call it mining for gold. Take a handful of the mud that is life and look through every piece of it for gold. There are places in your life that you can be positive. Choose to wring those out. Get every ounce of joy out of those moments you can. The final thing is, if you want to get depressed, just forget about God's provision. I mean, God has provided for Elijah over and over and over again, right? Just in the 3 chapters. That doesn't even cover all of what got Elijah to that place because we don't know. He just pops on the scene and starts succeeding like crazy. We don't know all of what has gone on in his life. We don't know what things he went through as a kid. We don't know all of his story. But what we do know is that at this point in his life, he's been on cloud 9. He chooses to get alone by himself. He chooses to focus on the negative, and he chooses to forget God's amazing provision. But you want to fight depression instead of get depressed? Man, choose to remember what God's done and choose to proclaim the truth that he'll do it again. It's not an easy story to see, but it happens in our lives. We have a potential to see unbelievable things when God heals us from difficult times like this. But the thing I want you to get when you walk away from this, I have it tattooed on my arm. It's okay to not be okay. I have a much more complex version that I wish I would have known this other version. But one day I was struggling through this whole idea, this depression stuff, all the stuff about what is going on in our lives, how do we figure it out, how do we find stuff. It's okay to not be okay. What I had tattooed is, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to be okay with not being okay. Now there's an easier version I found out after the ink dried. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. It's not okay just to kind of go, maybe it'll get better tomorrow. This is a serious issue. It's something we have to deal with. And if we're struggling through it, or your spouse is struggling through it, or your friends are struggling, or your brother or your sister, or whoever's going through it, when they're going through that, this is a serious issue, and they need you to love them, support them, and encourage them to get help and to move forward. Man, depression sucks. But God can bring peace into those moments. That's really what this whole thing really kind of settles on, isn't it? is that God is the all-powerful one, sovereign over all of it. In a minute, we're going to take communion together. Maybe for you today, that communion piece of it is really just a proclamation of God's power. We're going to sing a song in a minute. You're familiar with this song. We've been singing it for a while. It starts with the words peace. Bring it all to peace. This fear surrounding me, fear and depression, anxiety are all cousins of the same enemy who wants to steal and kill and destroy. So let's sing this song. And as we kind of get to the end of that song, the ushers are gonna come up and they'll hand this tray to you. And this tray will be really simple, right? It has a little pile of bread and a little cup of juice. If you're new to Journey or new to this whole thing and you're not sure about this, I want you to know something. That this is something we offer to everyone. You don't have to be a part of Journey, or this doesn't have to be home for you to take communion with us. We're thrilled you're here. When that tray gets to you, if you're a follower of Jesus, you just take one of each of those and take some time and focus on God's presence, ask for his healing, and just lean into this relational opportunity that we have with Jesus. But if you're here today and this isn't your story, this whole faith thing is not your deal, I want you to know something. You're among friends. There's nobody in this room who wants you to pretend to be something you're not. It's okay with us if you believe what you want to believe and belong here. You can belong here before you believe what we believe. When that tray gets to you, you can just hand it to the person next to you. Nobody in this room is going to look at you funny. Nobody in this room is going to judge you for that. You won't be the only one who does it. It's an important thing for you just to be able to think through this one question. When you go through dark times, who is it that you're ultimately depending on to pull you through? But we're going to sing this song together. And it can be for some of us who are struggling through this dark night of the soul, this moment in our life where we hit these depressive tendencies, for us to declare, maybe in faith, right, that he brings it all to peace, this fear that's surrounding me. Maybe you don't really believe that yet. Maybe we sing it as a declaration of what we know can be true in our life if we choose to believe it. Let's stand and let's sing together.